So yes, this story, The Mortal Immortal, comes with a content warning for a bit of suicidal ideation, which comes in. So yeah, if that is something that makes you uncomfortable, that's completely fine. Do not feel you have to listen to it. I can't foreshadow it when I'm reading it, but if you feel free to zone out, skip on if you listen to the VOD, or just tune out for a few minutes if you're listening live. And the other thing that I was going to say, there's a term that comes up right off the bat in this one, which I have looked up, because usually when in a lot of these stories when the subject of Jewishness comes up, it's usually used in a derogatory way, as a slur, as basically this person is Jewish, therefore bad. And obviously, I don't want to put that out there. I don't want to read that and broadcast that. Just frankly, a lot of anti-Semitism in the time that a number of these stories were written. This one, off the bat, mentions the Wandering Jew, which is something that I have looked up, and as far as I can tell, isn't a derogatory term. If someone in chat is more familiar with it than me and wants to be like, hey Sam, no, maybe don't mention that, feel free to drop that in right now. But as far as I can see, it's just more of a just a fabled character, someone who basically an immortal sort of Jewish figure who wanders Europe. Doesn't seem to be inherently negative or sort of racist or stereotypical. So I kind of, again, when these stories bring up something like that, I usually try to skip round it, read it differently, reword it, something like that, because we're not here to analyze. We're not doing a lot of analysis and criticism of these things. It's pretty much just broadcast as written. And in that kind of context, I don't just want to blurt that out and do that kind of stuff. So yeah, as far as I can tell, this isn't a derogatory term, so I'm just going to read that as is. Apologies if I've made a mistake in that research. But yeah, with all that said, let's begin with The Mortal Immortal by Mary Shelley. July 16, 1833. This is a memorable anniversary for me. On it, I complete my 323rd year. The Wandering Jew? Certainly not. More than 18 centuries have passed over his head. In comparison with him, I am a very young immortal. Am I, then, immortal? This is a question which I have asked myself by day and night for now 303 years, and yet cannot answer it. I detected a grey hair amidst my brown locks this very day. That surely signifies decay. Yet it may have remained concealed there for 300 years, for some persons have become entirely white-headed before 20 years of age. I will tell my story, and my reader shall judge for me. I will tell my story, and so contrive to pass some few hours of a long eternity, become so wearisome to me. Forever. Can it be? To live forever? I have heard of enchantments in which the victims were plunged into a deep sleep, to wake after 100 years as fresh as ever. I have heard of the 7 sleepers. Thus, to be immortal would not be so burdensome. But oh, the weight of never-ending time, the tedious passage of the still succeeding hours. How happy was the fabled Nourjahad. But to my task. All the world has heard of Cornelius Agrippa. His memory is as immortal as his arts have made me. All the world has also heard of his scholar, who, unawares, raised the foul fiend during his master's absence, and was destroyed by him. The report, true or false, of this accident was attended with many inconveniences to the renowned philosopher. All his scholars at once deserted him. His servants disappeared. He had no one near him to put coals on his ever-burning fires while he slept, or to attend to the changeful colours of his medicines while he studied. Experiment after experiment failed because one pair of hands was insufficient to complete them. The dark spirits laughed at him for not being able to retain a single mortal in his service. I was then very young, very poor, and very much in love. I had been, for about a year, the pupil of Cornelius, though I was absent when this accident took place. On my return, my friends implored me not to return to the alchemist's abode. I trembled as I listened to the dire tale they told. I required no second warning, and when Cornelius came and offered me a purse of gold if I would remain under his roof, I felt as if Satan himself tempted me. My teeth chattered, my hair stood on end. I ran off as fast as my trembling knees would permit. My failing steps were directed whither for 2 years they had every evening been attracted. A gently bubbling spring of pure living waters, beside which lingered a dark-haired girl, whose beaming eyes were fixed on the path I was accustomed each night to tread. I cannot remember the hour when I did not love Bertha. We had been neighbours and playmates from infancy. Her parents, like mine, were of humble life, yet respectable. Our attachment had been a source of pleasure to them. In an evil hour, a malignant fever carried off both her father and mother, and Bertha became an orphan. She would have found a home beneath my paternal roof, but, unfortunately, the old lady of the near castle, rich, childless, and solitary, declared her intention to adopt her. Henceforth Bertha was clad in silk, inhabited a marble palace, and was looked on as being highly favoured by fortune. But in her new situation, among new associates, Bertha remained true to the friend of her humbler days. She often visited the cottage of my father, and when forbidden to go thither she would stray towards the neighbouring wood, and meet me beside its shady fountain. She often declared that she owed no duty to her new protectress equal in sanctity to that which bound us. Yet still I was too poor to marry, and she grew weary of being tormented on my account. She had a haughty but an impatient spirit, and grew angry at the obstacles that prevented our union. We met now after an absence, and she had been sorely beset while I was away. She complained bitterly and almost reproached me for being poor. I replied hastily, I am honest if I am poor. Were I not, I might soon become rich." This exclamation produced 1,000 questions. I feared to shock her by owning the truth, but she drew it from me, and then, casting a look of disdain on me, she said, "You pretend to love, and you fear to face the devil for my sake." I protested that I had only dreaded to offend her, while she dwelt on the magnitude of the reward that I should receive. Thus encouraged, shamed by her, led on by love and hope, laughing at my late fears, with quick steps and a light heart, I returned to accept the offers of the alchemist, and was instantly installed in my office. A year passed away. I became possessed of no insignificant sum of money. Custom had banished my fears. In spite of the most painful vigilance, I had never detected the trace of a cloven foot, nor was the studious silence of our abode ever disturbed by demonic howls. I still continued my stolen interviews with Bertha, and hope dawned on me. Hope, but not perfect joy. For Bertha fancied that love and security were enemies, and her pleasure was to divide them in my bosom. Though true of heart, she was somewhat of a coquette in manner, and I was jealous. She slighted me in 1,000 ways, yet would never acknowledge herself to be in the wrong. She would drive me mad with anger, and then force me to beg her pardon. Sometimes she fancied that I was not sufficiently submissive, and then she had some story of a rival favoured by her protectress. She was surrounded by silk-clad youths, the rich and gay. What chance had the sad-robed scholar of Cornelius compared with these? On one occasion, the philosopher made such large demands upon my time that I was unable to meet her as I was wont. He was engaged in some mighty work, and I was forced to remain, day and night, feeding his furnaces and watching his chemical preparations. Bertha waited for me in vain at the fountain. Her haughty spirit fired at this neglect, and when at last I stole out during the few short minutes allotted to me for slumber, and hoped to be consoled by her, she received me with disdain, dismissed me in scorn, and vowed that any man should possess her hand rather than he who could not be in two places at once for her sake. She would be revenged, and truly she was. In my dingy retreat I heard that she had been hunting, attended by Albert Hoffer. Albert Hoffer was favoured by her protectress, and the three passed in cavalcade before my smoky window. Methought that they mentioned my name. It was followed by a laugh of derision as her dark eyes glanced contemptuously towards my abode. Jealousy, with all its venom and all its misery, entered my breast. Now I shed a torrent of tears to think that I should never call her mine, and anon I imprecated 1,000 curses on her inconstancy. Yet still I must stir the fires of the alchemist, still attend on the changes of his unintelligible medicines. Cornelius had watched for 3 days and nights, nor closed his eyes. The progress of his alembics was slower than he expected. In spite of his anxiety, sleep weighed upon his eyelids. Again and again he threw off drowsiness with more than human energy. Again and again it stole away his senses. He eyed his crucibles wistfully. "Not ready yet," he murmured. "Will another night pass before the work is accomplished? Windsy, you are vigilant. You are faithful. You have slept, my boy. You slept last night. Look at that glass vessel. The liquid it contains is of a soft rose colour. The moment it begins to change its hue, awaken me. Till then I may close my eyes first. Till then I may close my eyes. First it will turn white, and then emit golden flashes, but wait not till then. When the rose colour fades, rouse me." I scarcely heard the last words, muttered as they were in sleep. Even then he did not quite yield to nature. "Windsy, my boy," he said again, "do not touch the vessel. Do not put it to your lips. It is a philtre to cure love. You would not cease to love your Bertha. Beware to drink." And he slept. His venerable head sunk on his breast, and I scarce heard his regular breathing. For a few minutes I watched the vessel. The rosy hue of the liquid remained unchanged. Then my thoughts wandered. They visited the fountain, and dwelt on 1,000 charming scenes never to be renewed. Never! Serpents and adders were in my heart, as the word never half formed itself on my lips. False girl! False and cruel! Never more would she smile on me as that evening smiled on Albert. Worthless, detested woman! I would not remain unrevenged. She should see Albert expire at her feet. She should die beneath my vengeance. She had smiled in disdain and triumph. She knew my wretchedness and her power. Yet what power had she? The power of exciting my hate, my utter scorn, all but indifference. Could I attain that? Could I regard her with careless eyes, transferring my rejected love to one fairer and more true? That were indeed a victory. A bright flash darted before my eyes. I had forgotten the medicine of the adept. I gazed on it with wonder. Flashes of admirable beauty, more bright than those which the diamond emits when the sun's rays are on it, glanced from the surface of the liquid. An odour the most fragrant and grateful stole over my sense. The vessel seemed one globe of living radiance, lovely to the eye, and most inviting to the taste. The first thought, instinctively inspired by the grosser sense, was, I must drink. I raised the vessel to my lips. It will cure me of love, of torture. Already I had quaffed half of the most delicious liquor ever tasted by the palate of man, when the philosopher stirred. I started. I dropped the glass. The fluid flamed and glanced along the floor, while I felt Cornelius's gripe at my throat as he shrieked aloud, "Wretch! You have destroyed the labour of my life!" The philosopher was totally unaware that I had drunk any portion of his drug. His idea was, and I gave a tacit assent to it, that I had raised the vessel from curiosity, and that, frighted at its brightness and the flashes of intense light it gave forth, I had let it fall. I never undeceived him. The fire of the medicine was quenched. The fragrance died away. He grew calm, as a philosopher should under the heaviest trials, and dismissed me to rest. I will not attempt to describe the sleep of glory and bliss which bathed my soul in paradise during the remaining hours of that memorable night. Words would be faint and shallow types of my enjoyment, or of the gladness that possessed my bosom when I woke. I trod air. My thoughts were in heaven. Earth appeared heaven, and my inheritance upon it was to be one trance of delight. This is to be cured of love, I thought. I will see Bertha this day, and she will find her lover cold and regardless, too happy to be disdainful, yet how utterly indifferent to her. The hours danced away. The philosopher, secure that he had once succeeded, and believing that he might again, began to concoct the same medicine once more. He was shut up with his books and drugs, and I had a holiday. I dressed myself with care. I looked in an old but polished shield which served for my mirror. Methought my good looks had wonderfully improved. I hurried beyond the precincts of the town, joy in my soul, the beauty of heaven and earth around me. I turned my steps towards the castle. I could look on its lofty turrets with lightness of heart, for I was cured of love. My Bertha saw me afar off as I came up the avenue. I know not what sudden impulse animated her bosom, but at the sight she sprung with a light fawn-like bound down the marble steps, and was hastening towards me. But I had been perceived by another person. The old high-born hag, who called herself her protectress, and was her tyrant, had seen me also. She hobbled, panting, up the terrace. A page, as ugly as herself, held up her train, and fanned her as she hurried along, and stopped my fair girl with a, "How now, my bold mistress? Whither so fast? Back to your cage. Hawks are abroad." Bertha clasped her hands. Her eyes were still bent on my approaching figure. I saw the contest. How I abhorred the old crone who checked the kind impulses of my Bertha's softening heart. Hitherto, respect for her rank had caused me to avoid the lady of the castle. Now I disdained such trivial considerations. I was cured of love, and lifted above all human fears. I hastened forwards, and soon reached the terrace. How lovely Bertha looked! Her eyes flashing fire, her cheeks glowing with impatience and anger. She was 1,000 times more graceful and charming than ever. I no longer loved. Oh, no, I adored, worshipped, idolized her. She had that morning been persecuted, with more than usual vehemence, to consent to an immediate marriage with my rival. She was reproached with the encouragement that she had shown him. She was threatened with being turned out of doors and with disgrace and shame. Her proud spirit rose in arms at the threat. But when she remembered the scorn that she had heaped upon me, and how, perhaps, she had thus lost one whom she now regarded as her only friend, she wept with remorse and rage. At that moment I appeared. "Oh, Windsy," she exclaimed, "take me to your mother's cot. Swiftly let me leave the detested luxuries and wretchedness of this noble dwelling. Take me to poverty and happiness." I clasped her in my arms with transport. The old lady was speechless with fury, and broke forth into invective only when we were far on our road to my natal cottage. My mother received the fair fugitive, escaped from a gilt cage to nature and liberty, with tenderness and joy. My father, who loved her, welcomed her heartily. It was a day of rejoicing, which did not need the addition of the celestial potion of the alchemist to steep me in delight. Soon after this eventful day, I became the husband of Bertha. I ceased to be the scholar of Cornelius, but I continued his friend. I always felt grateful to him for having, unawares, procured me that delicious draught of a divine elixir, which, instead of curing me of love, sad cure, solitary and joyless remedy for evils which seem blessings to the memory, had inspired me with courage and resolution, thus winning for me an inestimable treasure in my Bertha. I often called to mind that period of trance-like inebriation with wonder. The drink of Cornelius had not fulfilled the task for which he affirmed that it had been prepared, but its effects were more potent and blissful than words can express. They had faded by degrees, yet they lingered long, and painted life in hues of splendour. Bertha often wondered at my lightness of heart and unaccustomed gaiety, for before I had been rather serious or even sad in my disposition. She loved me the better for my cheerful temper, and our days were winged by joy. 5 years afterwards, I was suddenly summoned to the bedside of the dying Cornelius. He had sent for me in haste. Conjuring my instant presence, I found him stretched on his pallet, enfeebled even to death. All of life that yet remained animated his piercing eyes, and they were fixed on a glass vessel full of a roseate liquid. "Behold," he said in a broken and inward voice, "the vanity of human wishes. A second time my hopes are about to be crowned. A second time they are destroyed. Look at that liquor. You remember 5 years ago I had prepared the same with the same success. Then, as now, my thirsting lips expected to taste the immortal elixir. You dashed it from me, and at present it is too late." He spoke with difficulty and fell back on his pillow. I could not help saying, "How, revered master, can a cure for love restore you to life?" A faint smile gleamed across his face as I listened earnestly to his scarcely intelligible answer. "A cure for love and for all things. The elixir of immortality. Ah, if now I might drink, I should live forever." As he spoke, a golden flash gleamed from the fluid. A well-remembered fragrance stole over the air. He raised himself. All weak as he was, strength seemed miraculously to re-enter his frame. He stretched forth his hand. A loud explosion startled me. A ray of fire shot up from the elixir, and the glass vessel which contained it was shivered to atoms. I turned my eyes towards the philosopher. He had fallen back. His eyes were glassy, his features rigid. He was dead. But I lived, and was to live forever. So said the unfortunate alchemist, and for a few days I believed his words. I remembered the glorious drunkenness that had followed my stolen draught. I reflected on the change I had felt in my frame, in my soul. The bounding elasticity of the one, the buoyant lightness of the other. I surveyed myself in a mirror and could perceive no change in my features during the space of the 5 years which had elapsed. I remembered the radiant hues and grateful scent of that delicious beverage, worthy the gift it was capable of bestowing. I was, then, immortal. A few days after I laughed at my credulity. The old proverb that a prophet is least regarded in his own country was true with respect to me and my defunct master. I loved him as a man, I respected him as a sage, but I derided the notion that he could command the powers of darkness and laughed at the superstitious fears with which he was regarded by the vulgar. He was a wise philosopher, but had no acquaintance with any spirits but those clad in flesh and blood. His science was simply human, and human science, I soon persuaded myself, could never conquer nature's laws so far as to imprison the soul forever within its carnal habitation. Cornelius had brewed a soul-refreshing drink, more inebriating than wine, sweeter and more fragrant than any fruit. It possessed probably strong medicinal powers, imparting gladness to the heart and vigour to the limbs, but its effects would wear out. Already they were diminished in my frame. I was a lucky fellow to have quaffed health and joyous spirits, and perhaps long life at my master's hands, but my good fortune ended there. Longevity was far different from immortality. I continued to entertain this belief for many years. Sometimes a thought stole across me. Was the alchemist indeed deceived? But my habitual credence was that I should meet the fate of all the children of Adam at my appointed time, a little late, but still at a natural age. Yet it was certain that I retained a wonderfully youthful look. I was laughed at for my vanity in consulting the mirror so often, but consulted it in vain. My brow was untrenched, my cheeks, my eyes, my whole person continued as untarnished as in my 20th year. I was troubled. I looked at the faded beauty of Bertha. I seemed more like her son. By degrees, our neighbours began to make similar observations, and I found at last that I went by the name of the scholar bewitched. Bertha herself grew uneasy. She became jealous and peevish, and at length she began to question me. We had no children. We were all in all to each other, and though as she grew older her vivacious spirit became a little allied to ill temper, and her beauty sadly diminished, I cherished her in my heart as the mistress I had idolized, the wife I had sought and won with such perfect love. At last our situation became intolerable. Bertha was 50. I was 20 years of age. I had, in very shame, in some measure adopted the habits of a more advanced age. I no longer mingled in the dance among the young and gay, but my heart bounded along with them while I restrained my feet. And a sorry figure I cut among the nesters of our village. But before the time I mention, things were altered. We were universally shunned. We were, at least I was, reported to have kept up an iniquitous acquaintance with some of my former master's supposed friends. Poor Bertha was pitied, but deserted. I was regarded with horror and detestation. What was to be done? We sat by our winter fire. Poverty had made itself felt, for none would buy the produce of my farm, and often I had been forced to journey 20 miles to some place where I was not known to dispose of our property. It is true we had saved something for an evil day. That day was come. We sat by our lone fireside, the old-hearted youth and his antiquated wife. Again Bertha insisted on knowing the truth. She recapitulated all she had ever heard said about me, and added her own observations. She conjured me to cast off the spell. She described how much more comely grey hairs were than my chestnut locks. She descanted on the reverence and respect due to age. How preferable to the sight regard paid to mere children. I could imagine that the despicable gifts of youth and good looks outweighed disgrace, hatred, and scorn. Nay, in the end I should be burnt as a dealer in the black art, while she, to whom I had not deigned to communicate any portion of my good fortune, might be stoned as my accomplice. At length she insinuated that I must share my secret with her, and bestow on her like benefits to those I myself enjoyed, or she would denounce me. And then she burst into tears. And I have to take a second because I have a cat howling at my door and I need to shut some windows, so 1 second. Yep, you did indeed hear a cat. He was probably going to try and walk on the laptop at one point, because that's now what he does. So, where was I? Yes, thank you, Joey. Yeah, for those that are new, this is Joey. He is a loud boy and a very good cat. He is indeed a cat. Yes, right, anyway, I shall resume before I get too distracted. Thus beset, methought it was the best way to tell the truth. I revealed it as tenderly as I could, and spoke only of a very long life, not of immortality, which representation indeed coincided best with my own ideas. When I ended, I rose and said, "And now, my Bertha, will you denounce the lover of your youth? You will not, I know, but it is too hard, my poor wife, that you should suffer from my ill luck and the accursed arts of Cornelius. I will leave you. You have wealth enough, and friends will return in my absence. I will go. Young as I seem, and strong as I am, I can work and gain my bread among strangers, unsuspected and unknown. I loved you in youth. God is my witness that I would not desert you in age, but that your safety and happiness require it." I took my cap and moved towards the door. In a moment Bertha's arms were round my neck and her lips were pressed to mine. "No, my husband, my Winsey," she said, "you shall not go alone. Take me with you. You will remove from this place, and, as you say, among strangers we shall be unsuspected and safe. I am not so very old as quite to shame you, my Winsey, and I dare say the charm will soon wear off, and with the blessing of God you shall become more elderly looking, as is fitting. You shall not leave me." I returned the good soul's embrace heartily. "I will not, my Bertha, but for your sake I had not thought of such a thing. I will be your true, faithful husband while you are spared to me, and do my duty by you to the last." The next day we prepared secretly for our emigration. We were obliged to make great pecuniary sacrifices. It could not be helped. We realized a sum sufficient at least to maintain us while Bertha lived, and without saying adieu to anyone, quitted our native country to take refuge in a remote part of western France. It was a cruel thing to transport poor Bertha from her native village and the friends of her youth to a new country, new language, new customs. The strange secret of my destiny rendered this removal immaterial to me, but I compassioned her deeply and was glad to perceive that she found compensation for her misfortunes in a variety of little ridiculous circumstances. Away from all telltale chroniclers, she sought to decrease the apparent disparity of our ages by 1,000 feminine arts, rouge, youthful dress, and assumed juvenility of manner. I could not be angry. Did I not, myself, wear a mask? Why quarrel with hers, because it was less successful? I grieved deeply when I remembered that this was my Bertha, whom I had loved so fondly and won with such transport, the dark-eyed, dark-haired girl, with smiles of enchanting archness and a step like a fawn, this mincing, simpering, jealous old woman. I should have revered her grey locks and withered cheeks, but thus, it was my work, I knew, but I did not the less deplore this type of human weakness. Her jealousy never slept. Her chief occupation was to discover that, in spite of outward appearances, I was, myself, growing old. I verily believe that the poor soul loved me truly in her heart, but never had woman so tormenting a mode of displaying fondness. She would discern wrinkles in my face and decrepitude in my walk, while I bounded along in youthful vigour, the youngest looking of 20 youths. I never dared address another woman. On one occasion, fancying that the belle of the village regarded me with favouring eyes, she'd bought me a grey wig. Her constant discourse among her acquaintances was that though I looked so young, there was ruin at work within my frame, and she affirmed that the worst symptom about me was my apparent health. My youth was a disease, she said, and I ought at all times to prepare, if not for a sudden and awful death, at least to awake some morning white-headed and bowed down with all the marks of advanced years. I let her talk. I often joined in her conjectures. Her warnings chimed in with my never-ceasing speculations concerning my state, and I took an earnest, though painful, interest in listening to all that her quick wit and excited imagination could say on the subject. Why dwell on these minute circumstances? We lived on for many years. Bertha became bedrid and paralytic. I nursed her as a mother might a child. She grew peevish, and still harps upon one string of how long I should survive her. It has ever been a source of consolation to me that I performed my duty scrupulously towards her. She had been mine in youth, she was mine in age, and at last, when I heaped the sod over her corpse, I wept to feel that I had lost all that really bound me to humanity. Since then, how many have been my cares and woes, how few and empty my enjoyments. I pause here in my history. I will pursue it no further. A sailor without rudder or compass, tossed on a stormy sea, a traveller lost on a widespread heath, without landmark or star to guide him. Such have I been, more lost, more hopeless than either. A nearing ship, a gleam from some far cot may save them, but I have no beacon except the hope of death. Death, mysterious, ill-visaged friend of weak humanity, why alone of all mortals have you cast me from your sheltering fold? Oh, for the peace of the grave, the deep silence of the iron-bound tomb, that thought would cease to work in my brain, and my heart beat no more with emotions varied only by new forms of sadness. Am I immortal? I return to my first question. In the first place, is it not more probable that the beverage of the alchemist was fraught rather with longevity than eternal life? Such is my hope. And then, be it remembered that I only drank half of the potion prepared by him. Was not the whole necessary to complete the charm? To have drained half the elixir of immortality is but to be half immortal. My forever is thus truncated and null. But again, who shall number the years of the half of eternity? I often try to imagine by what rule the infinite may be divided. Sometimes I fancy age advancing upon me. One grey hair I have found. Fool! Do I lament? Yes, the fear of age and death often creeps coldly into my heart, and the more I live, the more I dread death, even while I abhor life. Such an enigma is man, born to perish, when he wars, as I do, against the established laws of his nature. But for this anomaly of feeling, surely I might die. The medicine of the alchemist would not be proof against fire, sword, and the strangling waters. I have gazed upon the blue depths of many a placid lake, and the tumultuous rushing of many a mighty river, and have said, peace inhabits those waters. Yet I have turned my steps away, to live yet another day. I have asked myself whether suicide would be a crime in one to whom thus only the portals of the other world could be opened. I have done all, except presenting myself as a soldier or duellist, an object of destruction to not my fellow mortals, and therefore I have shrunk away. They are not my fellows. The inextinguishable power of life in my frame and their ephemeral existence place us wide as the poles asunder. I could not raise a hand against the meanest or the most powerful among them. Thus I have lived on for many a year, alone and weary of myself, desirous of death, yet never dying. Immortal. Neither ambition nor avarice can enter my mind, and the ardent love that gnaws at my heart, never to be returned, never to find an equal on which to expend itself, lives there only to torment me. This very day I conceived a design by which I may end all, without self-slaughter, without making another man a Cain, an expedition which mortal frame can never survive, even endued with the youth and strength that inhabits me. Thus I shall put my immortality to the test, and rest for ever, or return the wonder and benefactor of the human species. Before I go, a miserable vanity has caused me to pen these pages. I would not die, and leave no name behind. 3 centuries have passed since I quaffed the fatal beverage. Another year shall not elapse before, encountering gigantic dangers, warring with the powers of frost in their home, beset by famine, toil, and tempest, I yield this body, too tenacious a cage for a soul which thirsts for freedom. I survive. My name shall be recorded as one of the most famous among the sons of men, and, my task achieved, I shall adopt more resolute means, and by scattering and annihilating the atoms that compose my frame, set at liberty the life imprisoned within, and so cruelly prevented from soaring from this dim earth to a sphere more congenial to its immortal essence. And that's the end of the Immortal. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to go to a break. So you know what to do, unless you don't. In which case, you have about 5 minutes, give or take, depending on whether I'm able to get up and move with a cat on my lap. Go rotate those fluids, stretch your limbs, whatnot. Do what you can to avoid the heat. I have windows shut and lights on, so I'm not going to be able to do much. And yeah, we will see you in 5 minutes. Bye for now. with hopefully an audible cat, because he hasn't moved, he's just been sat on my lap purring and enjoying the attention. So I've angled the mic down in the hope of trying to get some purrs on stream so you can get some of that. Maybe it's not working, I don't know. Mic might be shutting out too much sound, but this does mean I haven't had any water, so yes, you can. Good. I am glad. Because if you're going to be here, you may as well contribute to the ambience. The actual quality content that people turn out for. Yeah, that's like the happy cat interruption is really the proper allure. Hey, Salad, what's up? Welcome. I also saw Ray Tracer show up in chat earlier. How are you? If you were around, I don't know if you were going. I hope that you were well. But yeah, welcome back. I hope you've had a good break. I haven't had water yet. Joey's probably going to jump off at some point soon. At which point I will before I start reading again. But I forgot some business that I had to attend to at the start of the stream, which is this. Because it turns out we've nearly been doing this for a year now. So that's frightening. We actually probably need to make some new sub badges. I don't think we made more than 12 months. Yeah, well, I suppose the way Twitch counts things. No, well, yeah, it was August when we started. I remember looking up the date, but yeah, like it was like a month early. But yeah, thank you. I'm sad you enjoyed the goth story, but also stay hydrated. Yeah, I shall do. Yeah, I enjoyed that one. I thought that was good. I appreciate the parallels to Frankenstein. Again, it's a different thing. Like Frankenstein is someone kind of the intentional folly of man meddling with nature and then kind of being a really crap deadbeat dad, and the harm that causes others. Whereas this is someone who's just, he's a bit more unfortunate. He's working for the alchemist, and just kind of happens to end up accidentally drinking it's a law, I've got to drink it. But it's a slightly different setup, but also still ends with a trip to the North Pole. So here we are. But yeah, I don't know what other stories Mary Shelley has written, but with that and Frankenstein, it's kind of, I could happily go and read some other stuff. She's got a good style. It's fun to read. Is Joey still audible? Are you still audible? Are you still... Yes, you must be. You're still putting in the good work. Thank you. Okay. This is somewhat delaying the start of the second half. Is that a flea? You've had your flea stuff. You shouldn't still have that on you. You know? Yeah, he's had a bout of fleas recently and has had flea stuff, which has certainly alleviated it, but there was just one crawling on him that I briefly caught and then it got away from me. Recently we watched the Frankenstein Ballet, so good, big recommendation. Neat, okay. I have never seen ballet. It's like any, I don't think, obviously I'm aware of what it is, but yeah, I don't think I've ever actually sat and watched ballet. I don't know that it's something I would get much out of, but I imagine Lucy would probably encourage me to watch it and find something for me to watch, so I dare say that's coming my way at some point in the future. Who knows? But yeah, okay, I guess when Joey is done, I'm going to have to put the mic back. I apologise. You will have to force me. Yeah, I mean, that's fine. I'll learn. I'll get some culture in me. But yes, I'm going to carry on with the second story for tonight, because, not least, I wasn't going to cut this in half for the VOD, so anyone listening back to that, no, don't attack my bookmark. It's not a toy. Okay? Good boy. Oh, yeah, it's a book with one of the ribbon bookmarks, and this is now a cat toy. But yeah, this is our second story for tonight. I don't have any content warnings for this one, other than, if you happen to care about physics, this might upset you. But it's fine. This is all researched and perfectly normal and sensible and correct. And yeah, you want to inspect the book. Okay, there you go. This, written by Edward Page Mitchell, is the Tachypomp A mathematical demonstration. There was nothing mysterious about Professor Surd's dislike for me. I was the only poor mathematician in an exceptionally mathematical class. The old gentleman sought the lecture room every morning with eagerness, and left it reluctantly. For was it not a thing of joy to find 70 young men who, individually and collectively, preferred X to XX, who had rather differentiate than dissipate, and for whom the limbs of the heavenly bodies had more attractions than those of earthly stars upon the spectacular stage? So affairs went on swimmingly between the Professor of Mathematics and the junior class at Polyp University. In every man of the 70, the sage saw the logarithm of a possible Laplace, of a Sturm, or of a Newton. It was a delightful task for him to lead them through the pleasant valleys of conic sections, and beside the still waters of the integral calculus. Figuratively speaking, his problem was not a hard one. He had only to manipulate and eliminate, and to raise to a higher power the triumphant result of examination day, and the triumphant result of examination day was assured. But I was a disturbing element, a perplexing unknown quantity which had somehow crept into the work, and which seriously threatened to impair the accuracy of his calculations. It was a touching sight to behold the venerable mathematician as he pleaded with me not so utterly to disregard precedent in the use of cotangents, or as he urged, with eyes almost tearful, that ordinates were dangerous things to trifle with. All in vain. More theorems went on to my cuff than into my head. Never did chalk do so much work to so little purpose. And therefore it came that Furnace Second was reduced to 0 in Professor Surd's estimation. He looks upon me with all the horror which an unalgebraic nature could inspire. I have seen the professor walk around an entire square rather than meet the man who had no mathematics in his soul. For Furnace Second were no invitations to Professor Surd's house. 70 of the class supped in delegations around the periphery of the professor's tea-table. The 71st knew nothing of the charms of that perfect ellipse, with its twin bunches of fuchsias and geraniums in gorgeous precision at the two foci. This, unfortunately enough, was no trifling deprivation. Not that I longed especially for segments of Mrs. Surd's justly celebrated lemon pies, not that the spheroidal damsons of her excellent preserving had any marked allurements, not even that I yearned to hear the professor's jocose table talk about binomials and chatty illustrations of abstruse paradoxes. The explanation is far different. Professor Surd had a daughter. 20 years before, he made a proposition of marriage to the present Mrs. S. He added a little corollary to his proposition not long after. The corollary was a girl. Abscissa Surd was as perfectly symmetrical as Giotto's circle, and as pure withal as the mathematics her father taught. It was just when spring was coming to extract the roots of frozen-up vegetation that I fell in love with the corollary. That she herself... Joey's just going for the laptop now, don't do this, buddy. That she herself was not indifferent I soon had reason to regard as a self-evident truth. The sagacious reader will already recognise nearly all the elements necessary to a well-ordered plot. We have introduced a heroine, inferred a hero, and constructed a hostile parent after the most approved model. A movement for the story, a deus ex machina, is alone lacking. With considerable satisfaction I can promise a perfect novelty in this line, deus ex machina never before offered to the public. It would be discounting ordinary intelligence to say that I sought with unwearying assiduity to figure my way into the stern father's goodwill, that never did dullard apply himself to mathematics more patiently than I, that never did faithfulness achieve such meagre reward. Then I engaged a private tutor. His instructions met with no better success. My tutor's name was Jean-Marie Rivarol. He was a unique Alsatian, though Gallic in name, thoroughly Teuton in nature, by birth a Frenchman, by education a German. His age was 30, his profession omniscience, the wolf at his door poverty, the skeleton in his closet a consuming but unrequited passion. The most recondite principles of practical science were his toys, the deepest intricacies of abstract science his diversions. Problems which were foreordained mysteries to me were to him as clear as Tahoe water. Perhaps this very fact will explain our lack of success in the relation of tutor and pupil. Perhaps the failure is alone due to my own unmitigated stupidity. Rivarol had hung about the skirts of the university for several years, supplying his few wants by writing for scientific journals or by giving assistance to students who, like myself, were characterized by a plethora of purse and a paucity of ideas. Cooking, studying and sleeping in his attic lodgings, and prosecuting queer experiments all by himself. We were not long discovering that even this eccentric genius could not transplant brains into my deficient skull. I gave over the struggle in despair. An unhappy year dragged its slow length around. A gloomy year it was, brightened only by occasional interviews with Abscissa, the abbey of my thoughts and dreams. Commencement day was coming on apace. I was soon to go forth with the rest of my class to astonish and delight our waiting world. The professor seemed to avoid me more than ever. Nothing but the conventionalities, I think, kept him from shaping his treatment of me on the basis of unconcealed disgust. At last, in the very recklessness of despair, I resolved to see him, plead with him, threaten him if need be, and risk all my fortunes on one desperate chance. I wrote him a somewhat defiant letter, stating my aspirations, and, as I flattered myself, shrewdly giving him a week to get over the first shock of horrified surprise. Then I was to call and learn my fate. During the week of suspense, I nearly worried myself into a fever. It was first crazy hope, and then saner despair. On Friday evening, when I presented myself at the professor's door, I was such a haggard, sleepy, dragged-out spectre that even Miss Jocasta, the harsh-favoured maiden sister of the Surds, admitted me with commiserate regard and suggested pennyroyal tea. Professor Surd was at a faculty meeting. Would I wait? Yes, till all was blue if need be. Miss Abbey? Abscissa had gone to Wilborough to visit a school friend. The aged maiden hoped I would make myself comfortable, and departed to the unknown haunts which knew Jocasta's daily walk. Comfortable! But I settled myself in a great uneasy chair, and waited, with the contradictory spirit common to such junctures, dreading every step lest it should herald the man whom, of all men, I wished to see. I had been there at least an hour, and was growing right drowsy. At length, Professor Surd came in. He sat down in the dusk opposite me, and I thought his eyes glinted with malignant pleasure, as he said, abruptly, "So, young man, you think you are a fit husband for my girl?" I stammered some inanity about making up in affection what I lacked in merit, about my expectations, family, and the like. He quickly interrupted me. "You misapprehend me, sir. Your nature is destitute of those mathematical perceptions and acquirements which are the only sure foundations of character. You have no mathematics in you. You are fit for treason, stratagems, and spoils." Shakespeare. "Your narrow intellect cannot understand and appreciate a generous mind. There is all the difference between you and a Surd, if I may say it, which intervenes between an infinitesimal and an infinite. Why, I will even venture to say that you do not comprehend the problem of the couriers." I admitted that the problem of the couriers should be classed rather without my list of accomplishments rather than within it. I regretted this fault very deeply and suggested amendment. I faintly hoped that my fortune would be such. "Money!" he impatiently exclaimed. "Do you seek to bribe a Roman senator with a penny whistle? Why, boy, do you parade your paltry wealth, which, expressed in mils, will not cover 10 decimal places, before the eyes of a man who measures the planets in their orbits and close crowds infinity itself." I hastily disclaimed any intention of obtruding my foolish dollars, and he went on, "Your letter surprised me not a little. I thought you would be the last person in the world to presume to an alliance here, but having a regard for you personally," and again I saw malice twinkle in his small eyes, "and still more regard for Absissa's happiness, I have decided that you shall have her, upon conditions." "Upon conditions," he repeated with a half-smothered sneer. "What are they?" I cried eagerly enough. "Only name them." "Well, sir," he continued, and the deliberation of his speech seemed the very refinement of cruelty, "you have only to prove yourself worthy of an alliance with a mathematical family. You have only to accomplish a task which I shall presently give you. Your eyes ask me what it is. I will tell you. Distinguish yourself in that noble branch of abstract science in which, you cannot but acknowledge, you are at present sadly deficient. I will place Absissa's hand in yours, whenever you shall come before me and square the circle to my satisfaction. No, that is too easy a condition. I should cheat myself. Say perpetual motion. How do you like that? Do you think it lies within the range of your mental capabilities? You don't smile. Perhaps your talents don't run in the way of perpetual motion? Several people have found that theirs didn't. I'll give you another chance. We were speaking of the problem of the couriers, and I think you expressed a desire to know more of that ingenious question. You shall have the opportunity. Sit down some day, when you have nothing else to do, and discover the principle of infinite speed. I mean the law of motion which shall accomplish an infinitely great distance in an infinitely short time. You may mix in a little practical mechanics if you choose. Invent some method of taking the tardy courier over his road at the rate of 60 miles a minute. Demonstrate me this discovery, when you have made it, mathematically, and approximate it practically, and Absissa is yours. Until you can, I will thank you to trouble neither myself nor her. I could stand his mocking no longer. I stumbled mechanically out of the room and out of the house. I even forgot my hat and gloves. For an hour I walked in the moonlight. Gradually I succeeded to a more hopeful frame of mind. This was due to my ignorance of mathematics. Had I understood the real meaning of what he asked, I should have been utterly despondent. Perhaps this problem of 60 miles a minute was not so impossible after all. At any rate, I could attempt, though I might not succeed, and Riverall came to my mind. I would ask him. I would enlist his knowledge to accompany my own devoted perseverance. I sought his lodgings at once. The man of science lived in the fourth story back. I had never been in his room before. When I entered, he was in the act of filling a beer mug from a carboy labelled Aquafortis. "Seat you," he said. "No, not in that chair. That is my petty cash adjuster." But he was a second too late. I had carelessly thrown myself into a chair of seductive appearance. To my utter amazement, it reached out two skeleton arms and clutched me with a grasp against which I struggled in vain. Then a skull stretched itself over my shoulder and grinned with ghastly familiarity close to my face. Riverall came to my aid with many apologies. He touched a spring somewhere and the petty cash adjuster relaxed its horrid hold. I placed myself gingerly in a plain, cane-bottomed rocking chair, which Riverall assured me was a safe location. "That seat," he said, "is an arrangement upon which I must felicitate myself. I made it at Heidelberg. It has saved me a vast deal of small annoyance. I consign to its embraces the friends who bore and the visitors who exasperate me, but it is never so useful as when terrifying some tradesman with an insignificant account. Hence the pet name which I have facetiously given it. They are invariably too glad to purchase release at the price of a bill receipted. Do you well apprehend the idea?" While the Alsatian diluted his glass of Aquafortis, shook into it an infusion of bitters, and tossed off the bumper with apparent relish, I had time to look around the strange apartment. The four corners of the room were occupied, respectively, by a turning lathe, a Ruhmkorff coil, a small steam engine, and an orrery in stately motion. Tables, shelves, chairs, and floor supported an odd aggregation of tools, retorts, chemicals, gas receivers, philosophical instruments, boots, flasks, paper collar boxes, books diminutive and books of preposterous size. There were plaster busts of Aristotle, Archimedes, and Comte, while a great drowsy owl was blinking away, perched on the benign brow of Martin Farquhar Tupper. "He always roosts there when he proposes to slumber," explained my tutor. "You are a bird of no ordinary mind. Schlafen Sie wohl." Through a closet door half open, I could see a human-like form covered with a sheet. Rivarol caught my glance. "That," said he, "will be my masterpiece. It is a microcosm, an android, as yet only partially complete. And why not? Albertus Magnus constructed an image perfect to talk metaphysics and confute the schools. So did Sylvester II. So did Robertus Greathead. Roger Bacon made a brazen head that held discourses. But the first named of these came to destruction. Thomas Aquinas got wrathful at some of its syllogisms and smashed its head. The idea is reasonable enough. Mental action will yet be reduced to laws as definite as those which govern the physical. Why should I not accomplish a mannequin which shall preach as original discourses as the Reverend Dr. Olchin, or take poetry as mechanically as Paul Anapest? Talk poetry. My android can already work problems in vulgar fractions and compose sonnets. I hope to teach it the positive philosophy. Out of the bewildering confusion of his effects, Rivarol produced 2 pipes and filled them. He handed one to me. "And here," he said, "I live and am tolerably comfortable. When my coat wears out at the elbows, I seek the tailor and am measured for another. When I am hungry, I promenade myself to the butcher's and bring home a pound or so of steak, which I cook very nicely in 3 seconds by this oxyhydrogen flame. Thirsty? Perhaps I send for a carboy of aquafortis. But I have it charged. All charged. My spirit is above any small pecuniary transaction. I loathe your dirty greenbacks and never handle what they call scrip." "But are you never pestered with bills?" I asked. "Don't the creditors worry your life out?" "Creditors?" gasped Rivarol. "I have learned no such word in your very admirable language. He who will allow his soul to be vexed by creditors is a relic of an imperfect civilization. Of what use is science if it cannot avail a man who has accounts current? Listen, the moment you or anyone else enters the outside door, this little electric bell sounds me warning. Every successive step on Mrs. Grimler's staircase is a spy and informer vigilant for my benefit. The first step is trod upon. That trusty first step immediately telegraphs your weight. Nothing could be simpler. It is exactly like any platform scale. The weight is registered up here upon this dial. The second step records the size of my visitor's feet. The third, his height. The fourth, his complexion, and so on. By the time he reaches the top of the first flight, I have a pretty accurate description of him right here at my elbow, and quite a margin of time for deliberation. An action. Do you follow me? It is plain enough, only the ABC of my science." "I see all that," I said, "but I don't see how it helps you any. The knowledge that a creditor is coming won't pay his bill. You can't escape unless you jump out of the window." Rivarol laughed softly. "I will tell you. You shall see what becomes of any poor devil who goes to demand money of me, of a man of science. Ha ha! It pleases me. I was 7 weeks perfecting my dun suppressor. Did you know," he whispered exultingly, "did you know that there is a hole through the Earth's centre? Physicists have long suspected it. I was the first to find it. You have read how Huygens, the Dutch navigator, discovered in Kerguelen's land an abysmal pit which 1,400 fathoms of plumb line failed to sound. Herr Tom, that hole has no bottom. It runs from one surface of the earth to the antipodal surface. It is diametric. But where is the antipodal spot? You stand upon it. I learned this by the merest chance. I was deep digging in Mrs. Grimler's cellar to bury a poor cat I had sacrificed in a galvanic experiment, when the earth under my spade crumbled, caved in, and wonder-stricken I stood upon the brink of a yawning shaft. I dropped a coal hod in. It went down, 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 bounding and rebounding. In 2 hours and a quarter the coal hod came up again. I caught it, and restored it to the angry Grimler. Just think a minute. The coal hod went down faster and faster, till it reached the centre of the earth. There it would stop, were it not for acquired momentum. Beyond the centre, its journey was relatively upward, toward the opposite surface of the globe. So, losing velocity, it went slower and slower till it reached that surface. Here it came to rest for a second, and then fell back again, 8,000 odd miles, into my hands. Had I not interfered with it, it would have repeated its journey time after time, each trip of shorter extent, like the diminishing oscillations of a pendulum, till it finally came to eternal rest at the centre of the sphere. I am not slow to give a practical application to any such grand discovery. My Dunn suppressor was born of it. A trap just outside my chamber door, a spring in here, a creditor on the trap. Need I say more? But isn't it a trifle inhuman, I mildly suggested, plunging an unhappy being into a perpetual journey to and from Kerguelen's land without a moment's warning? I give them a chance. When they come up the first time, I wait at the mouth of the shaft with a rope in hand. If they are reasonable, they will come to terms, and will come to terms, I fling them the line. If they perish, 'tis their own fault. Only, he added with a melancholy smile, the centre is getting so plugged up with creditors that I am afraid there soon will be no choice whatever for 'em. By this time, I had conceived a high opinion of my tutor's ability. If anybody could send me waltzing through space at an infinite speed, Rivarol could do it. I filled my pipe and told him the story. He heard with grave and patient attention. Then, for full half an hour, he whiffed away in silence. Finally he spoke. The ancient cipher has overreached himself. He has given you a choice of 2 problems, both of which he deems insoluble. Neither of them is insoluble. The only gleam of intelligence old cotangent showed was when he said that squaring the circle was too easy. He was right. It would have given you your Liebchen in 5 minutes. I squared the circle before I discarded pantalettes. I will show you the work, but it would be a digression, and you are in no mood for digressions. Our first chance, therefore, lies in perpetual motion. Now, my good friend, I will frankly tell you that, although I have compassed this interesting problem, I do not choose to use it on your behalf. I, too, Herr Tom, have a heart. The loveliest of her sex frowns upon me. Her somewhat mature charms are not for Jean-Marie Rivarol. She has cruelly said that her years demand of me filial rather than connubial regard. Is love a matter of years or of eternity? This question did I put to the cold, yet lovely Jocasta. "Jocasta Serd?" I remarked in surprise. "Abscissa's aunt?" "The same," he said sadly. "I will not attempt to conceal that upon the maiden Jocasta my maiden heart has been bestowed. Give me your hand, my nephew, in affliction as in affection." Rivarol dashed away not a discreditable tear, and resumed. "My only hope lies in this discovery of perpetual motion. It will give me the fame, the wealth. Can Jocasta refuse these? If she can, there is only the trapdoor, and Kerguelen's land." I bashfully asked to see the perpetual motion machine. My uncle in affliction shook his head. "At another time," he said, "suffice it at present to say that it is something upon the principle of a woman's tongue. But you see now why we must turn in your case to the alternative condition. Infinite speed. There are several ways in which this may be accomplished, theoretically. By the lever, for instance. Imagine a lever with a very long and very short arm. Apply power to the shorter arm, which will move it with great velocity. The end of the long arm will move much faster. Now keep shortening the long arm and lengthening keep shortening the short arm and lengthening the long one, and as you approach infinity in their difference of length, you approach infinity in the speed of the long arm. It would be difficult to demonstrate this practically to the professor. We must seek another solution. Jean-Marie will meditate. Come to me in a fortnight. Good night. But stop, you have the money? Das Geld? Much more than I need. Good, let us strike hands. Gold and knowledge, science and love. What may not such a partnership achieve? We go to conquer thee, Abscissa. Vorwärts! When, at the end of a fortnight, I sought Rivarol's chamber, I passed with some little trepidation over the terminus of the air line to Kerguelenland and evaded the extended arms of the petty cash adjuster. Rivarol drew a mug of ale for me and filled himself a retort of his own peculiar beverage. "Come," he said at length, "let us drink success to the Tachypomp." The Tachypomp? Yes, why not? Tachy, quickly, and pepompa to send. May it send you quickly to your wedding day. Abscissa is yours. It is done. When shall we start for the prairies? Where is it? I asked, looking in vain around the room for any contrivance which might seem calculated to advance matrimonial prospects. It is here, and he gave his forehead a significant tap. Then he held forth didactically. There is force enough in existence to yield us a speed of 60 miles a minute, or even more. All we need is the knowledge how to combine and apply it. The wise man will not attempt to make some great force yield some great speed. He will keep adding the little force to the little force, making each little force yield its little speed, until an aggregate of little forces shall be a great force, yielding an aggregate of little speeds a great speed. The difficulty is not in aggregating the forces, it lies in the corresponding aggregation of the speeds. One musket ball will go, say, a mile. It is not hard to increase the force of muskets to 1,000, yet the 1,000 musket balls will go no farther and no faster than the one. You see then where our trouble lies. We cannot readily add speed to speed as we add force to force. My discovery is simply the utilization of a principle which extorts all increment of speed from each increment of power. But this is the metaphysics of physics. Let us be practical or nothing. When you have walked forward on a moving train from the rear car toward the engine, did you ever think what you were really doing? Why, yes, I have generally been going to the smoking car to have a cigar. Tut, not that. I mean, did it ever occur to you on such an occasion that absolutely you were moving faster than the train? The train passes the telegraph poles at a rate of 30 miles an hour, say. You walk toward the smoking car at the rate of 4 miles an hour. Then you pass the telegraph poles at a rate of 34 miles. Your absolute speed is the speed of the engine plus the speed of your own locomotion. Do you follow me? I began to get an inkling of his meaning and told him so. Very well, let us advance a step. Your addition to the speed of the engine is trivial, and the space in which you can exercise it limited. Now suppose two stations, A and B, 2 miles distant by the track. Imagine a train of platform cars, the last car resting at station A. The train is a mile long, say. The engine is therefore within a mile of station B. Say the train can move a mile in 10 minutes. The last car, having 2 miles to go, would reach B in 20 minutes. But the engine, a mile ahead, would get there in 10. You jump on the last car at A in a prodigious hurry to reach Abscissa, who is at B. If you stay on the last car, it will be 20 long minutes before you see her. But the engine reaches B and the fair lady in 10. You will be a stupid reasoner and an indifferent lover if you don't put for the engine over those platform cars as fast as your legs will carry you. You can run a mile, the length of the train, in 10 minutes. Therefore, you reach Abscissa with the engine, so when the engine does, or in 10 minutes. 10 minutes sooner than if you had lazily sat down upon the rear car and talked politics with the brakeman. You have diminished the time by 1/2. You have added your speed to that of the locomotive to some purpose. Nicht wahr? I saw it perfectly, much plainer perhaps for his putting in the clause about abscissa. He continued, "This illustration, though a slow one, leads up to a principle which may be carried to any extent. Our first anxiety will be to spare your legs and wind. Let us suppose that the 2 miles of track are perfectly straight, and make our train one platform car, a mile long, with parallel rails laid upon its top. Put a little dummy engine on these rails, and let it run to and fro along the platform car, while the platform car is pulled along the ground track. Catch the idea? The dummy takes your place, but it can run its mile much faster. Fancy that our locomotive is strong enough to pull the platform car over the 2 miles in 2 minutes. The dummy can attain the same speed. When the engine reaches B in 1 minute, the dummy, having gone a mile atop the platform car, reaches B also. We have so combined the speeds of those 2 engines as to accomplish 2 miles in 1 minute. Is this all we can do? Prepare to exercise your imagination." I lit my pipe. "Still 2 miles of straight track between A and B. On the track, a long platform car reaching from A to within 1/4 of a mile of B. We will now discard ordinary locomotives and adopt as our motive power a series of compact magnetic engines distributed underneath the platform car all along its length." "I don't understand those magnetic engines." "Well, each of them consists of a great iron horseshoe, rendered alternately a magnet and not a magnet by an intermittent current of electricity from a battery, this current in its turn regulated by clockwork. When the horseshoe is in the circuit, it is a magnet, and it pulls its clapper towards it with enormous power. When it is out of the circuit, the next second, it is not a magnet, and it lets the clapper go. The clapper, oscillating to and fro, imparts a rotary motion to a flywheel which transmits it to the drivers on the rails. Such are our motors. They are no novelty, for trial has proved them practicable. With a magnetic engine for every truck of wheels, we can reasonably expect to move our immense car and to drive it along at a speed, say, of a mile a minute. The forward end, having but 1/4 of a mile to go, will reach B in 15 seconds. We will call this platform car number 1. On top of number 1 are laid rails, on which another platform car, number 2, 1/4 of a mile shorter than number 1, is moved in precisely the same way. Number 2, in its turn, is surmounted by number 3, moving independently of the tiers beneath and 1/4 of a mile shorter than number 2. Number 2 is 1.5 miles long, number 3 1.25 miles. Above, on successive levels, are number 4, 1 mile long, number 5, 3/4 of a mile, number 6, 1/2 mile, number 7, 1/4 of a mile, and number 8, a short passenger car on top of all. Each car moves upon the car beneath it, independently of all the others, at the rate of a mile a minute. Each car has its own magnetic engines. While the train being drawn up with the latter end of each car resting against a lofty bumping post at A, Tom Furniss, the gentlemanly conductor, and Jean-Marie Rivarol, engineer, mount by a long ladder to the exalted number 8. The complicated mechanism is set in motion. What happens? Number 8 runs 1/4 of a mile in 15 seconds and reaches the end of number 7. Meanwhile, number 7 has run 1/4 of a mile in the same time and reached the end of number 6. Number 6, 1/4 of a mile in 15 seconds and reached the end of number 5. Number 5, the end of number 4. Number 4 of number 3. Number 3 of number 2. Number 2 of number 1. And number 1, in 15 seconds, has gone its 1/4 of a mile along the ground track and has reached station B. All this has been done in 15 seconds. Wherefore numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 come to rest against the bumping post at B at precisely the same second. We, in number 8, reach B just when number 1 reaches it. In other words, we accomplish 2 miles in 15 seconds. Each of the 8 cars, moving at the rate of a mile a minute, has contributed 1/4 of a mile to our journey and has done its work in 15 seconds. All the 8 did their work at once during the same 15 seconds. Consequently, we have been whizzed through the air at the somewhat startling speed of 7.5 seconds to the mile. This is the Tachypomp. Does it justify the name? Although a little bewildered by the complexity of cars, I apprehended the general principle of the machine. I made a diagram and understood it much better. You have merely improved on the idea of my moving faster than the train when I was going to the smoking car. Precisely. So far we have kept within the bounds of the practicable. To satisfy the professor, you can theorize in something after the fashion. If we double the number of cars, thus decreasing by 1/2 the distance which each has to go, we shall attain twice the speed. Each of the 16 cars will have but 1/8 of a mile to go. At the uniform rate we have adopted, the 2 miles can be done in 7.5 instead of 15 seconds. With 32 cars and a 1/16 of a mile or 20 rods difference in their length, we arrive at the speed of a mile in less than 2 seconds, with 64 cars, each travelling but 10 rods, a mile under the second. More than 60 miles a minute. If this isn't rapid enough for the professor, tell him to go on increasing the number of his cars and diminishing the distance each one has to run. If 64 cars yield a speed of a mile inside the second, let him fancy a tachypomp of 640 cars and amuse himself calculating the rate of car number 640. Just whisper to him that when he has an infinite number of cars with an infinitesimal difference in their lengths, he will have obtained that infinite speed for which he seems to yearn. Then demand abscissa. I wrung my friend's hand in silent and grateful admiration. I could say nothing. "You have listened to the man of theory," he said proudly. "You shall now behold the practical engineer. We will go to the west of the Mississippi and find some suitably level locality. We will erect thereon a model tachypomp. We will summon thereunto the professor, his daughter, and why not his fair sister Jocasta as well. We will take them on a journey which shall much astonish the venerable Surd. He shall place Abscissa's digits in yours, and bless you both with an algebraic formula. Jocasta shall contemplate with wonder the genius of Rivarol. But we have much to do. We must ship to St. Joseph the vast amount of material to be employed in the construction of the tachypomp. We must engage a small army of workmen to effect that construction, for we are to annihilate time and space. Perhaps you had better see your bankers." "Stop! Excuse me. I rushed impetuously to the door. There should be no delay. "Stop! Stop! God's villain, stop!" shrieked Rivarol. "I launched my butcher this morning, and I haven't bolted the—" But it was too late. I was upon the trap. It swung open with a crash, and I was plunged down, down, down. I felt as if I were falling through illimitable space. I remember wondering, as I rushed through the darkness, whether I should reach Kerguelen's land or stop at the centre. It seemed an eternity. Then my course was suddenly and painfully arrested. I opened my eyes. Around me were the walls of Professor Surd's study. Under me was a hard, unyielding plane which I knew too well as Professor Surd's study floor. Behind me was the black, slippery haircloth chair which had belched me forth, much as the whale served Jonah. In front of me stood Professor Surd himself, looking down with a not unpleasant smile. "Good evening, Mr. Furness. Let me help you up. You look tired, sir. No wonder you fell asleep when I kept you so long waiting. Shall I get you a glass of wine? No? By the way, since receiving your letter, I find that you are a son of my old friend, Judge Furness. I have made inquiries and see no reason why you should not make Abscissa a good husband." Still, I can see no reason why the tachypomp should not have succeeded. Can you? And that's the end of the tachypomp, and the end of our reading for tonight. So thank you for listening.